Welcome to Vision Chats, where the only thing that matters is the future. I am Farouk, Vice Provost at Johns Hopkins University, and I am excited to be here with you today to talk about the future of career services and reimagining how we transition college students to careers. And I'm even more excited to be having this conversation today with three friends. You know, sometimes I invite people who I don't know, and I get to know them throughout the Vision Chat. But every now and then I try to use the Vision Chat excuse to have a conversation with my close friends who seem to want to just avoid me all the time and don't want to take my calls. So with me today are Joe Testani, who is an AVP and head of career services at University of Rochester. Hi, Joe. We have Branden Grimmett, who is associate provost at Loyola Marymount University, also a really good friend. Hi, Branden.
Hi, Farouk.
And Katharine Boshkoff, who is VP at Halt International Business School with all of its campuses all around the world. And really excited to have you with us today. Katharine, hi.
Thanks. Hi, Farouk.
And hello to all of you. So feel free to jump in with your questions and your thoughts. We're going to have lots of conversations. I am reminded of how we started Vision Chats as a series about a year and a half ago, talking about the impact of the pandemic on students' career plans and life design and how colleges will help them virtually and in person. And it's amazing how things have changed to a year and a half later, where we're now really dealing with supply chain issues, the workforce changing in front of us, and this great resignation that's happening all around us with people really making choices and prioritizing life and work-life balance and family. And that is also now showing up in our students' behaviors too. So they're starting to think about what they really want, and do they really want to apply for this job versus that. The requirements in jobs are changing. We're seeing different skills being are required in job postings. And we also know that the idea of remote work is here to stay. It has gone up within the last year and a half by 500%. It was 2% of job postings were remote on LinkedIn. Now there are 10%. We also know that over 60% of the workforce today are looking to change fields or change jobs or thinking about completely changing their career trajectories. So there's a lot of change happening today, and I would love to start it here. What are you seeing on your own campuses, and what are some of the early patterns that can turn into trends that all of us have to watch for, and how can universities adapt? Would love to start with any of you, so don't jump in all at once.
I'll jump in. I think at the University of Rochester, I think we have a significant number of international students. And I think just as like a visceral impact of the pandemic, I think we had a reckoning, right? Some of our students couldn't get back to campus. I think that's now evolved in how we're thinking about diversifying our international student body in terms of what countries they might be coming from, how we're able to support those students, where they're getting work. I think the remote piece and what they're able to do. So I think just as one example of, I think, probably 1,000 that we can probably talk about today. I think that international student piece, and Katharine, I'd love to obviously get your perspective on this, obviously, because HALT is a different animal, I think, than the University of Rochester in terms of its footprint. But I think that was something that we really had to grapple with. First, this health and safety of those students and the mental health impact that it had for students that couldn't get back home for months, if not over a year and a half or 2 years. And then what does that mean long-term to our admissions, recruitment efforts, and then the work that we're doing in career? How does that shift how we're thinking about, if we haven't been thinking about global marketplaces, we should have been, but if we haven't been, this probably throws that into, I think, very much some clarity around that topic of figuring out what does that mean moving forward? Where are the growth places? Do you have to actually come to the States to work? Do you have to study in the States at all? And can you get an education that's different? So I feel like that international piece just for us, because we were at 30% of our undergraduate population was international at one point. So it's a significant portion, and I think a daily reminder that we're looking at on a regular basis. That's just one thing that comes to mind right away, Farouk, in terms of what that impact was and how that might be shifting.
I'm right with you on international. So 93% of my students are studying not in their country. And we had exactly the same challenge when COVID started, which is they left the country and then they couldn't get back in. And we had students all over the world and we needed to support them. So we figured out how to do that. And I think the learning was how to be really good in a hybrid environment. So we had some campuses open, some campuses not open. So Dubai closed and they opened up, London closed and they opened, closed, open. They had a lot of opening and closing in London, crazy place. And then we have students stuck, India, they're studying in the middle of the night, bunch of students in Italy. And I would say what the learning for us is we can teach online. We can support students. We can do hybrid. There is benefit in students participating with other human beings, even if they can't get to the campus. And so that was really changed a lot of what we do. So I think online is not going away. Whether it's how it works out for everybody, I don't know. But I think we thought it was a temporary thing, and now we realize it's not at all. And especially for international students who may or may not be coming on a plane to see us. So it's going to help them. And then on work, I would have to say, I'd love to hear what you see. I'm surprised how many places in the United States international students are working. When I look at my employment reports, they're all over the place. So I think it's been a great advantage for them. We've got them in Austin with AWS. We've got folks in Chicago. We have people in New York doing fintech, and remote work I think, worked to their advantage because they've got the skills. They just didn't have the job, and now they're mobile without going anywhere. So I think that's a nice one for international students.
I agree with you, Katharine. And I think the way I framed the past year and a half is that we all had a little experiment where we got to figure out if we enjoyed working from home or not. And, faculty that may have been teaching online classes for years had colleagues now that maybe had been resistant in previous years who are now learning it for the first time. And so they got to, help out their peers and colleagues as well. One of the things that I have noticed is that our students are looking for a lot of meaningful change, right? And so apologies, I live in Los Angeles. And so if you hear sirens in the background, just a little bit of authenticity here. They're not coming from me, hopefully. But our students are looking for a lot of change as well. So I think the other piece that happened in the past year and a half is that, we're all stuck at home. We're logging in remotely from wherever we are, and we're noticing things that maybe we had not paid attention to before. Cultural shifts and movements, paying more attention to identity and how that intersects with educational opportunity and social mobility, which I know Farouk cares a lot about as well. So for me, what's been interesting is how do we connect students to brilliant thinkers and movers and shakers, not who just share identities with the students that are interested in that, but people that can help navigate and help our students navigate those institutions they're joining. So for instance, we're not finding it to be enough to put our students in touch with other people that share those identities. They have to meet people that have opened doors for themselves within organizations that maybe need a little bit more inclusion efforts or belonging efforts as well. And so I wanted to add that to the discussion, Farouk, because I think so much of what our campuses are dealing with is the aftermath of demands from students, demands from faculty and staff about how to live and work together. And people are really not biting their tongue anymore, as far as I can tell.
Yeah, I agree. And it felt like the catalyst for that was, unfortunately, the murder of George Floyd, which happened during the pandemic. So you're right. While we were in a pandemic, a ton of things happened that pushed us to think differently. And we had the time to reflect on it, but also we were almost forced not to look away, to look the other way. We had to see it. And I think that was, George Floyd was not the first Black man who was murdered at the hands of police, but he was the first one who really triggered this global reaction, because everybody had to sit there and see the entire thing. And then that translated back to the workplace. How do we make our workplaces more inclusive, and then also for universities? But I think for us within this college to career transition, we really started to look more into how do we measure our success based on the impact of our work on all students, regardless of their backgrounds, regardless of their social capital. So, for instance, for us, really success is about the gaps. It's not about the aggregate numbers for everyone. It's what it doesn't matter to me if we say 97% of our students are participating in great opportunities and are, have found what they're looking for. Afterwards, I want to measure the differences between the haves and have-nots within those 97%, and the 3% who are left. Do they tend to represent a particular group that we have not paid attention to? From that sense, I think we are, for the first time, genuinely, truly caring about this in the way that we are now allocating resources and allocating staff and are spending more time in training to do that. And we still have a long way to go, but we're finally just not paying lip service to it in some places. I think we're starting to really do the deep work because we're starting to own it in a way. So that's been a big transformation that needs to continue as we reimagine how we do our work as we transition students from college to career. It's a recognition that for some of these students are going to have an easier time than others, based on their backgrounds, based on their social capital, based on how they grew up and the networks that are around them.
Yeah, and Farouk, I just want to say that I completely agree. I think higher education has been paying attention to the gap between the haves and have-nots for a while, but what I'm also seeing is a lot of proliferation of chief diversity officers in corporate entities, sometimes for the first time ever for the organization. And so I'm keeping my eye on the success of those positions, because I think it's one thing to embolden our students to bring their full selves to, not just to the university, but to their employment landscape. But if there's a nascent emergence of an inclusion or belonging culture at the companies they're joining, there's going to be work for them to do as new employees, but maybe more so learning that they achieved in undergrad or grad that they can then apply to their new workplaces. And so we're trying to learn not just from ourselves as institutions, but also from corporate, nonprofit, government agencies as well.
Mm-hmm. I think it's been really interesting to watch and pay attention to the agency and the voice that I think corporations or universities have been forced to really actually listen to in a real way, more so now than I think ever before, and how students and early talent are actually making choices about the organizations they want to work with. And I think organizations, to Branden's point, they have to actually shift now. And I think that they were never in a position where they had to. They could put some sort of notice out and statement out on Instagram, and then I think it would kind of dissipate and people would move on. And I think this has had staying power and continues to be, I hope, a transformative opportunity. And what's the investment action that organizations are taking? And I looked at Branden when we were kind of in the summer after George Floyd's murder. I think we had a reckoning within our own office and thinking about this. And I looked to people like Branden and what they were doing at LMU and how they were tackling this and what statements and messaging they were putting out from their office as regardless of what the university was saying, what they were saying. And then there were others around the country that I think were doing similar things. And then it forced us to stop and think about what's the actual action we're going to take as an organization to support our students. What does that look like for us? And is that message clear to students that we're taking action to support them, whether that's removing barriers or providing funding or acknowledging our own gaps in understanding and knowledge around these topics of race and social justice and privilege. And I think that was hard for some people on the staff. And Branden came to talk to my team a few months ago. And I think there's a lot of individual journeys that were happening. And I think the main message for me was, you have to be on the journey. You have to work on this. And different people are going to be at different places. But I think it starts in that really granular level. I think from a corporation, it's not only hiring a VP or some sort of C-suite diversity officer, is what's happening on the ground level in those organizations to change the culture, because they're systemically have problems in how they've been recruiting for years. And how do you start to shift that and turn the corner on that? But that voice that I think that people have had, I think in the last year and a half, I think that's had staying power. And I hope that continues to be the case, because that's what's going to be needed, not just from Black and Brown people, but from allies and other people to push that momentum forward on so many different scales. And I think this has been something I think that I've had to do my own reflecting on as to what I've been able to or not done within my own organization.
Yeah, I want to add to this is that, as we try to reimagine the work of career centers in universities over the next decade to build upon all of this little progress that we've made in the last year and a half, is to really take it from process to, or from input to output, is to measurable outcomes is what needs to happen. And I think that is the next step, is how do we go from having these training sessions and having these positions and doing more programming that is more attentive to the diversity of our students and paying more attention to inclusion and to belonging, is how do we ultimately start to see the needle move in a way that makes the experience, but also the outcome, equitable for all students and for all alumni. We still have a long ways to go there, because it's not just the work of a career center, it's what happens in the classroom with faculty. It's how we do enrollment, it's how we advertise, and it's how we manage alumni, but also it's what happens in the workforce. So I think one of the comments that was just shared in the chat was that students are really wanting to move beyond just these statements and these conversations. And I think what I've heard also in another comment is that students are wanting to be in a place where it's more than just being represented in the brochure. Is that they want to see action and they want to see real work throughout the university. And I think, in my perspective, the way to get there is to move beyond peripheral additional services and accommodations that we have to provide in order to increase the feelings of inclusion and belonging, and to get to a place where we're really reassessing and redoing the entire system so that we don't have to accommodate, so that it's just there, equitable for all. I think that's using the universal design type of approach is really the best way to get us there. If you build it for all with the principles that would make it equitable for some, you will get to total equity, as opposed to creating an office for this or an office for that, which, those efforts are important, but overall, I think that's how we'll get there. So that would be the hard work ahead.
So that really resonates with what we're trying to do, what we have been doing since at Holt. We have 140 countries participating in the program. We have all versions of ethnicity, religion, philosophy, and we try to mix. All of the work's done in teams, and the teams change throughout the year. So we try to keep the team dynamics mixed so that students have the opportunity to engage with other people that they might not have met in their life. And that's the foundation of where it starts. And of course, sometimes the teams do well, sometimes they have challenges, but it creates the opportunity to start to have a conversation. And from there, we hope that it's a rich environment where conversations can happen, which is not to say we have everything right, because we have so much work to do. We just hired our first diversity officer, which is fantastic, and has driven even more conversations, including conversations with our alumni about what their experience was. And we're trying to take all those experiences back into the curriculum, because it can't be a separate office. It has to be our work, all of our work, what we do with our students every day. So the deans are asking their faculty to include both sustainability, well, not both, sustainability, ethics, and diversity in all of their classes, so that we're changing the conversation. So it's a start.
That's a big deal.
Yeah, and Katharine, I also, hearing you speak makes me think about, Holt Business School as this combination of both an educational institution, but it's also a business, right? And I think sometimes we forget that each of our institutions, whether we're nonprofit, for-profit, regional, national, international, we've got a bottom line to serve as well, and we're a workplace, not just an educational institution. And so I'm very interested in what organizations like ours are doing to open up transparently how we're tackling issues around inclusion, and to your point, Farouk, making sure that every student, no matter who they are or what they have or don't have, achieves the outcomes that we say students will achieve if they come to our institutions. So at LMU, for instance, we're actually engaged in a system-wide systemic analysis of anti-racism work that we're doing at the local level. And tomorrow I'm bringing two of my colleagues from my office who are either BIPOC or LGBTQ identified to speak to our student leadership seminar on anti-racism and institutional transformation. And this class is specifically co-taught by our Chief Diversity Officer and our Dean of Students, but there's guest speakers that come in to talk about what we're actually doing at our own university to decolonize the curriculum and to provide more access to students. I also just want to tie this to something that my good friend Sheila Curran mentioned in the chat as well. Access is not enough. We have to think about how to support students once they get here. So another thing that's blowing up on our campus in a good way are what we call opportunity funds. So think about small dollars that students need to spend every day on our campuses that for some populations, it's easy to come by, and for others, it's extremely difficult. It might be a grad school application fee, it might be travel to and from an internship. But we have actually been piloting something for the past 5 years with a small group of students. Not only are those students achieving huge employment outcomes, but they're also retained as students of color that are in otherwise maybe at higher risk of not being retained. So these are some of the things we're doing at LMU, and I keep coming back to switching the mindset of, okay, we're not just an educational institution, we're also a workplace. So what are students, learning about the workplace that they're a part of before they graduate?
Mm-hmm. This is awesome, and it's making me think, Branden, of also the work that needs to happen for our own teams, because they are in a workplace, which is ours. And I want to tie this to a little bit of the great resignation that's happening nationally, and we're all experiencing it. And some of our team members are moving on to opportunities. And when I read about great resignation, I'm thinking about all of these individuals who have spent time reflecting about their careers and where they want to go and the choices they want to make. But I also can't help but think about the people who are just fed up with the work environments that they're in, who are no longer willing to take it. And I don't mean by that every workplace where people quit is hostile or is not employee friendly. I'm sure they do make a lot of efforts, but often I think it's really the lack of belonging, is if people, they just don't feel like this is the place for me. Is that I have to adjust a little or a lot of who I am in order to fit in order to be successful in this workplace. And finally, I think we might have reached a tipping point where people are just no longer willing to do it. After a year and a half, they're going, I am done. I think what's happening is also forcing the workforce, including our institutions, including our offices, to rethink our own human resource management practices. Everything from remote versus in person, and the conversations that we all have been a part of our campuses wanting to bring everybody back and trying to go with this hybrid approach, 2 days a week, 3 days a week on campus, and which maybe on the surface feels all silly. It's but the employee on the other hand is saying, no, I have a different vision for what this looks like, and there are enough of them now that are moving on that it's making the workplace rethink that from all of those practices, but also from just the perspective of how do we make people of underrepresented minority groups feel like they truly belong, that they have a seat at the table. So there's just a lot that's changing. I'd love to hear your thoughts about how you see that in even your own teams, in your own offices, the universities, and then possibly even employers who you're working with.
Farouk, I like to think that you're right in the sense that universities are adapting and reacting to this in a way that there is a reckoning.
Yeah.
However,
I think slow.
Well, I think there's a challenge here, right? Because I think many institutions, believe that people are working in university because they believe in the mission of the institution, and I think that supersedes any other challenges that might exist, or we're all aligned and we share some certain values. I think what's really coming to the surface is that we share some of those values, but I think there's still expectations that we have as workers that the organization should be doing. It should be advancing some of these, taking action on certain maybe DEI initiatives, maybe rethinking what it means to be in a workplace environment and what that means in terms of hybrid. And so I think there are many institutions that wanted to get back to whatever it was prior to pandemic. And I think that's where you're seeing some people leave, because I think they recognize that they could do the work and they could have impact and they could support students at the end of the day in a really significant way, without maybe some of the structure that was existed before. And I think that's where you're seeing this clash of some organizations, and some institutions are kind of entrenched and want to shift that. So this to me is all about change management. And I was talking to a higher ed class last night here at the university, and they asked, like, what's something that's really critical for us if we're going to go into higher ed? I said, understand change management, like number one thing, because I think this is our biggest challenge sometimes in higher ed, is that we don't think through that. We don't think about change management. We don't really kind of think long term in figuring out how to steer this ship in a certain direction. And oftentimes it's very reactive. And I think with this employment, people leaving, I think we're in this kind of doing the same thing. Okay, well, it's probably a money issue. Let's raise the money. Or it's a diversity. Let's do some trainings on diversity. And it's not either of those things. It's kind of all of those things at the same time. And I think it's the mental health challenges that have faced people that work in higher ed. I think it's like any other industry sector. I think there's been tolls on people in surviving the last 18 months. So I want to believe that, because I think our institutions, I believe in higher education. I've been doing this for 20 years. Like I believe in education as a vehicle and as a tool. But the organizations, I think, need to take a really hard look at what does it mean to have people, right? And what does that look like? And how do you support those people and provide them resources? It's not about being overworked. It is in some cases, but I think it's a lot of it has to do with, respect and dignity and trust and transparency, which don't necessarily always cost money. And I think that's something that I think we get wrong sometimes, within some of our organizations.
Yeah, that's true. And it's isn't it that higher education or universities in general are approaching this transformation from a risk aversion perspective more than a risk taking? I see this as the ideal opportunity for universities to finally experiment with the things that they have been thinking about for years and decades, but have not dared because it was just too risky. And I think if there was ever a time where it's okay to take some more risk, is now actually. But I feel like we're really just taking a step back in many ways. And this is one of those practices, is calling people back and asking them to fill in to put warm bodies in seats, and it's looking a little awkward to have all these people come back and be in offices messed up and still zooming in with one another. For the most part, we're not there yet, as opposed to really taking a leap forward and say, let's experiment more with this online virtual education or approaches, because technology is there, because students might value that. That might be a little harder to do, or especially with institutions that are much more dependent on enrollment. Thinking of you, Katharine, at Halt, that I wonder how you're approaching this conversation, given that you have 6 global campuses all around the world, and you've been playing with virtual way before the pandemic. So I wonder how you're transitioning now.
So, great question. We've been transitioning since we started. It is the way of being a new school in an old market. And we, as you know, we are a nonprofit. We have no endowment. We take no funding from our alumni. So we are well funded by the Holt family to get started. But we do have to offer to our students a program that they want to come to. So we're very enrollment dependent, which means on about every one of the innovation dimensions, we think about it. And so we did go to virtual really early. We saw it was coming. We have now these very fancy classrooms with the high-tech cameras that follow the profs around, and big screens behind where you can see every single person. And maybe you guys all have them too. When I started teaching one, I thought it was like science fiction. It's like pretty high tech. And so we're trying to do the best we can with virtual. And we understand that we are going to be teaching in virtual from here on out. And so we try to provide options for our students to be 100% virtual, to 100% in class, to hybrid, to changing their mind. So however you want to get educated with Holt, you can. If you want to be 100% online, fine. If you want to come to Boston and then go to Dubai and online into London, fine. If your mom gets sick and you have to leave and you want to study from Europe back into San Francisco, do it virtually. We'll figure it out. So we're trying to provide the flexibility that we think the world really needs right now, because it's not going to be one way or the other. It's going to be a time of change. And if I think of anything we need to get better on in supporting our students is resiliency, because this is so much stress for them. So at least as an administrator, we can think about what are things we can do to meet their needs a little bit better in this time when we can't take the pandemic away. But we can't make it possible for you not to come to campus this semester. Just stay where you are. So we're looking at that. And then the other thing that you and I've talked about in terms of reimagining careers is reimagine the whole thing. You can't really reimagine careers unless you take on the whole thing. So that's what we're doing. And we're reimagining careers, mainstreaming it into the classroom and having our career advisors become academic advisors so they can holistically have that conversation with the student. So we won't be thinking of ourselves as a separate department. We'll be thinking of ourselves as part of the work, part of what we do with our students. We're working on that design now, but it'll be things like when you're in the marketing class working on branding, you're going to work on your social brand at the same time. Or when you're in the leadership class and you're working on who am I, what are my skills, you're going to be thinking about your skills, values, and motivators. Why wouldn't you do that? So we're trying to figure out how to better integrate things that we would do in careers into the baseline learning so that every student gets it and every student has the time to work on it. So we're looking at the kind of, I think of the virtual as like a pipe. We work on the pipes, and then we're working really hard on the content right now. How do we change that content experience for people?
Katharine, really quick, there's a question in the chat that I think ties into what you just talked about. So how does this relate to the labor, to the national, international, and local labor markets in terms of the approach that you have in preparing students and working with them? So from education, you must be paying a lot of attention to what happens in labor markets locally, nationally, and internationally.
We do. And so in terms of labor markets, we're very up to date on where demand is and what the type of demand is. And we use Burning Glass. You guys probably do too. We're always looking at skills. We look at the recs that are, through Burning Glass. We know what the top skills are in demand by geography. And then we stay on top of the economies and what's in demand. And we advise our students on where to go as an international student, because as you know, you don't always have work rights wherever you want to be. So you have to be as good or better than the local population. This year, it's very much come to the US. The economy here is relatively strong. And we are trying to, within the US, get our Boston. We have a lot of people in Boston, and Boston is not a great labor market unless you're a doctor. But we are trying to get them to New York, to FinTech, and we are trying to get them out to California, because California has done really well during COVID. And those are the kind of conversations we have with students at the beginning of the year. Like, nobody is here to tell you what to do, but a rising tide does raise all ships. And if you want to know where the tide's going up and where to go, we're pretty straightforward with them about what their choices are. And then they look at the geography, industry, and role, and they make their own decisions about that. But we're really frank. Dubai might be a place to check out now with 2020, but don't buy a house. Don't plan to stay forever. Just do a year there.
That sounds really good.
Yeah.
I would love for all of you to react to reimagine the whole thing. I think that's triggering some things, and I know, Joe, what you're thinking. So go for it, Joe. I have actually a proposition for you, but I want to hear what Joe has to say. When I see Joe laugh like that, I know I see the little evil thinking happening there.
I don't know if it's evil thinking. I like the idea of kind of tossing everything out and it's just starting.
Get rid of it.
Yeah, you gotta get rid of something sometimes and start fresh. But I think we need to shock the system, and I think that's the challenge in higher ed, right? I think that's where I think institutions like HALT, Arizona State, in some pockets, I think these institutions, Western governors, right? They're pushing that. I think pre-pandemic they were already doing that, and I think their models have caused people to take a hard look at that since the pandemic, because there's things that are working, and it's not that they're sacrificing learners; they're putting them at the center of what they're doing, and I think that's an important piece here, that you can do both, right? You can have a reimagined approach to this, have high quality education, and be very learner centered, and still, be successful. And I think sometimes we thought that those things were at odds at different points. So I think there's creativity. I think there's room for a variety of versions of what education should look like in the United States, right? I think residential, selective institutions aren't going away anytime soon. But I think there's a lot of other institutions that should rethink how they approach the work, should rethink the problem and what they're facing, the students that they attract and what their needs are. So I like the idea of just changing it up, throwing some stuff out, starting over again. And my team will tell you, like, they don't like it all the time. Like I'm constantly, I think they love the pandemic because I couldn't come up with new ideas for them to do for like 6 months or so. But then I started getting antsy again after that and started doing some new things. But I think it's necessary. And I think that goes back to that change piece. So it's our comfort level that we're not used to changing that fast. And I think if we start building that muscle, I think it unlocks so many different opportunities, and we involve the students in that conversation, which I think oftentimes we don't have the students as a center of that conversation. And I think we debilitate ourselves when we don't.
I love that, Joe. I'm also looking at Lindsay's question or her comment about, kind of reimagining the whole thing. And for me, it's sometimes about language. We hear our students ask these questions that we never asked them, and that we wish that they would stop asking themselves, like, what am I going to do for the rest of my life? That's not a helpful question to ask or to answer, because no one knows the answer to that question. A better question is, what am I going to do next, or tomorrow, or next week, right? So we can kind of keep that continuum going. But I think a larger reframing for me is more about preparedness versus obstacle removing. So lately, we've been envisioning our entire work plan as the goal to remove obstacles for our students. If we assume that our students come to us with some basic knowledge, some inherent capability to represent themselves, to learn for learning's sake, and to do well at our institutions, that's enough to start with. There's plenty of obstacles, and Maya in the chat has been really helpful in kind of pointing out some of these institutional obstacles that, even though HR doesn't report to us or other parts of the university don't report to us, I believe we do have an obligation to name it and to try to build a bridge with those offices if they happen to be inadvertently, it's almost never an intentional decision, but an inadvertent obstacle that's been created for our students. It could be everything from student hiring on campus to offices that maybe hire around fit versus being as inclusive as we want them to be. So one example at our institution is that LinkedIn Learning was on the chopping block right before the pandemic. And I said, let's keep it during the pandemic, because I think we're going to need it. we had a enterprise-wide license, and it was being paid for by ITS. But once we got our hands on it as an office, we actually messaged every single student through the platform, pre-provisioned a lot of their accounts, and we had over 12,000 videos viewed in the first year that we started promoting it. And we're only a school of 10,000, so more than one video per student for us. But my point here is that it led to a cost-sharing conversation where we now split the cost of that resource with ITS and HR, and that provides a window of collaboration and influence that we can help our students navigate. So my whole reframing, Farouk, is to not think about students need more of something, but that career services has the power to remove obstacles that are getting in the way of them achieving what they came to achieve.
Yeah. Branden, has that resonated with folks around campus as you reframe that and start to bring that message out to others?
It has. I mean, it has resulted in, there's no more requests for etiquette dinners, which are my least favorite thing to do in career services.
Me too. Thank you.
I haven't done one in I think
Get
5
rid of
years.
that.
But I think it also inspires other offices that are student facing to give the students the benefit of the doubt, right? To assume that if they're at our institution and there's been a a collective decision institutionally to invite them to join our institution, that we should begin not with a deficit model, but with an assumption that they have capability. And I think that allows us to start at a much higher level than focusing on some of the things that our technologies actually can take care of without a lot of human interaction.
Right. I love it. So I'll before I share a potential model for you to react, let me just add to what you said, Branden. So I totally buy into the idea of just of changing the conversation and changing the language so that expectations are different. So, for us at Hopkins from day one, what we try to do is move away from the conversations of what are you going to do with your life. That's actually, I started my TEDx Life Purpose Reconsidered with that. What should I do with my life is the question that I want to get rid of forever. And I want parents to stop asking it. I want faculty, I want advisors, I want career people to stop asking it. I love your reframe. I'll share with you mine is that instead I want people to ask, what are you curious about? Whether it's not even what are you going to do next, what are you curious about today? Because I know for sure that you have an answer for that. I've never not had an answer for that. And typically I get it with a smile. People's eyes open up and I push them, like this is from the life design methodology is it's not just, it's that thing that's deep inside of you that you haven't dared to talk about that you probably thought is way out of reach. I want you to actually talk about that. What are you curious about? And then how are you going to move that into inspiration by just trying it out, by giving it a shot? And that could be taking a class, that could be reading a book or having a small little experience that can get you there. What is really important in that conversation is to get students to get comfortable with uncertainty. That is really important because everything that has been told to them prior to that is how can you have a certain plan? That is the expectation from parents, but also I think in our conversations in higher education, we throw that in a lot. Is what is your plan? What are you going to do with that major? Mm-hmm. I'll share with you a funny example. I got a call once by a university official, I won't say the title or what university, who they wanted to use the life design approach throughout the entire university, and which I thought, I was like, this is fantastic. And they said then the goal or the outcome, the desired outcome for that would be that every student will come out of that with a career plan. And I thought, wow, like you're really buying into the life design label, but if you really understood and understand, and we took the time to try to explain it, so eventually we got there to explain that what life design is about, it's actually the opposite of a career plan. We're trying to teach people not to have plans, to be comfortable with uncertainty, to try things out, and to really focus on curiosity. Other than career planning and making assessments and answering the question, what am I going to do? That is, that's what college is there for. So I'll get off my soapbox here and just present to you an idea. No more brick and mortar for Career Center. So imagine your Career Center has no building. So you give it up. There are plenty of people who would die to have your building. You'll be first to tell them you can have it. You'll be very popular. You'll make some friends that way. Maybe your staff will not really be happy with you. Maybe they will now after the pandemic. But you give that up. You do all of your engagement virtually with some really high level engagement on campus. And those will be packed because there are just few of those. And your focus is really on scale. You're using tech. You're engaging alumni and employers and faculty, all the technology. And you're given maximum flexibility, not only to your students, but also to your employees to work anywhere they'd like. That doesn't mean that they're working remotely all the time. That means that anywhere they'd like, but I would say anywhere where they can achieve the desired outcomes. That everything is driven by data, by outcomes, and location is not going to be one. I mean, that's just one part of the reimagined process that can get us there. Is throw away the whole thing and then just really start over. Don't name it Career Services, don't name it Career Center, but just give it a name that is really about the approach that you're using, that aligns with the spirit that you shared, Branden, for example, and really excite and inspire your students to be really engaged with that. How does that feel so far? There's a lot more you can build on top of that, but this is just as a baseline.
So are they, I asked in the pre-group, but I think it applies here too. Are they hiring actively this organization, or are they? I think that makes, I think the reality is it goes to what Katharine was talking about before about if this is seamlessly integrated, it doesn't necessarily have to be a need for that kind of service. And I think if it's combining what Branden is talking about, removing the barriers, and it's integrated into it, I think it makes perfect sense. That's what the university is there for. It is about knowledge, imparting knowledge and learning and all of that to create, more educated, thoughtful, citizens of the world. Mm-hmm. But I think if we are doing those other two pieces of integration and removing those barriers, that's the goal. And so, do you really need a service that's sort of out on the outskirts or on the periphery if it's doing those things? So I'm all in on that, Farouk. I think that supportive of this.
So question from Sheila Curran is, how do you measure success?
Well, I think, one of the things we're thinking about doing is getting rid of all assessments. Now, for those of you that are traditional career services folks, this is a little scary because, you've invested a lot of time and money and resources in training folks to interpret MBTI and Strong and all that good stuff. But the reason we're looking at this, and maybe to answer Sheila's question, is that we know what our students do while they're here. We know what their progression looks like. We know when we'd like them to be doing things. And sometimes students point to certain things that we offer as the silver bullet. They think, okay, if I can just take a career assessment, that's everything I need to know about myself, and then I'll be in good shape. If I can just get that resume reviewed, if I can just have that informational interview completed. Mm-hmm. So the students are interpreting different resources that we offer to have different value. I think what might be interesting for all of us to consider is if we tie our data integration, for instance, Handshake or whatever you might be using, to your student information system, and whenever there's a change in the status of a student, whether it's registering for a course or changing their major or matriculating from first year to second year, there should be a slate of things that we push out to them proactively without them having to even seek that, based upon what they're doing behind the scenes technologically. So we're looking to replace our assessments with that kind of proactive, it's a little bit big brother kind of thing. But what I've been fascinated by is that a lot of our students, when they're being asked these questions, do you want to share your data with these companies? A lot of them are saying yes, because they don't want the burden of having to make a decision about what they need to do next. They want the companies who know all of their behavior to be able to push out some thoughts and suggestions. And I think we can probably find a middle ground there where we don't put all the burden on the student to have to make the decision to come and see us. If it's not physical, that removes even one more barrier for them, Farouk. But I think a lot of us can have deeper, more strategic level conversations with our ITS professionals to try to push things out to our students rather than to have a pull strategy.
Mm-hmm. I totally agree with that. And I'll go even deeper on that. I think technology brings a certain democracy of careers to the institution. And by putting all of your knowledge, your assets, your resources in one virtual career center that everybody can use, your faculty, your alumni, everybody can use it. Then we kind of got the best. We don't have the brick building anymore, but we have this virtual place of community, of information where people can connect. And I think we're going whole hog on it. I'll just put it that way. We're giving it a real go. And our virtual career center also connects to Salesforce. So Handshake will go to Salesforce, and Salesforce will go to Handshake, and the virtual career center and Salesforce knows everything about the students. So through those two platforms, we can push content at them, provided they've opted in. So we will respect their privacy. But I'm from Silicon Valley. I was in technology, but I have very high hopes for what technology can do to make the information that we know in careers available to everybody, and also for the student to do their learning when they want to do it, or in our case, from wherever they are in the world, instead of the brick building, because they're not going to be in the brick building anyway. So I'm really hopeful about technology, and I think some of the really cool stuff we're seeing from EdTech is going to help us a lot.
Can I share with you what we're doing at Hopkins? So in the spring, 2022, we are opening the Reimagine Center for Integrative Learning and Life Design at Johns Hopkins University. It's a building that we've been renovating for the last 2 years. We designed the whole thing and the whole concept before the pandemic. And then, you know, it took a pandemic to make us realize that we were not only headed in the right direction, but also it accelerated a lot of the energy towards it. It's a building that will house 7 offices. The Life Design Lab, which is the newly branded, it's the former Career Center that's been rebranded as a Life Design Lab. The Office of Study Abroad, Office of Experiential Learning, undergraduate research will be there. There'll be the office that will serve PhDs and postdocs, as well as Hire Hopkins, which is all about employer development, and then our Hopkins Connect, which works directly with alumni and creating mentoring programs. The key features of the building is that it's all it was all designed to create maximum engagement and interaction between students, alumni, faculty, staff, students, and of course employers. We designed it specifically, this is pre-pandemic, to have 0 staff offices. So from day one, we decided everybody who from all of those units are not going to have a private office, including me. So I completely surrendered my office in the main admin office in the university, and we're going to be kind of like in an Apple store, engaging with students in the main spaces, and being able to really bring a lot of this programming that events, and then what that allows is for all of our employees to not be tethered to a location. They will work from that building, but they will work from anywhere where they can get their work done. So sometimes it's from home, sometimes it's from an academic building, sometimes it's from a different campus, sometimes it's in that building. So whatever gets us there, but it's a space that was designed primarily for students. And we've just really used the language, the design that, you know, we've spoken about to try to inspire people. So I'm really, really excited. It's been in the works for the last couple of years. We just landed on the name, the Reimagine Center. And it's all about not planning a career. It's about imagining and pursuing your curiosity. So you heard it here first.
Awesome. Congratulations. That's exciting.
I love this idea, Farouk. Yeah. I actually think that it also speaks to one of the questions I think Katie asked about anxiety with students. You know, I'm guessing on your campus that a lot of those offices are trusted by students because they've been helpful in the past, and bring them all together in one physical space, but also thinking about the collective diversity of all of those teams being visible to the students. You know, if we were to imagine that on all of our campuses, I think it gives us more options to represent the team that is behind student success, not just as a career center, but as a more collective team. And to Katie's question, if we can reduce student anxiety, then I think they're better able to invest in themselves, because that's a huge barrier, obviously, for our students.
Yes. Absolutely. And I appreciate Danielle sharing the new webpage that we're tinkering with in order to match the spirit of the building. But I agree with you. There's a lot that we can do in terms of just changing the language and the narrative and the expectations. And then, you know, what you see is that staffing models change as a result of that. So you start hiring based on that narrative. That narrative is going to attract a different kind of people who are interested in that kind of methodology. One of the things also is that really just change the requirements of what we're looking for. You know, when we're no longer looking for people who have counseling degrees and not necessarily. I mean, I have a counseling degree. I probably wouldn't get in to work in that building if I were to apply to work there. You know, nothing against people who work who have counseling degrees, but that's not necessarily the target audience that we're trying to shoot for. So it's we're really moving forward and progressively in that way. And the last 3 years have told us that have given us enough metrics to tell us that this is the direction to go. But it'll be interesting to see what future generations require of all of us. You know, Gen Z is telling us a lot today, but even the generations after that. I have a son who is a freshman in high school, and he's a walk-in study in front of me today of what is to come 4 years down the road and on our college campuses in terms of the way they think, they make meaning, what's important to them, what they're willing to tolerate, and then what they're not willing to deal with. And you could see that it's fast changing. So at some point, we just really have to embrace risk, not risk aversion, in order to truly change.
I think, Farouk, the important thing will be, so I love the idea, obviously, and what you're doing there, but in 5 years from now, for the university to be comfortable to actually turn it on its head and change it again, because that next generation is coming into the institution, or tweak it and calibrate it to be responsive. And I think that our responsiveness time has to go down significantly in terms of how we are supporting this next generation of students as they come into our institutions. And so, you know, I love the Imagine idea. And I think if you remove some of those boundaries and allow it to be flexible and fluid and adapt, I think that's the exciting part of something like that, is that it's putting the student at the forefront, and it's adapting to the changing students that we get coming into our institutions, and that's going to continue to evolve, you know, over the next 5 to 10 years. And that's the fun part, I think, that's in front of us.
Yeah, I agree. There's a lot of imagining that will happen in the future. So Maya, I think in the chat, talked about just reimagining the career professionals too. And I think that's what probably our greatest work is going to be in the next decade about that, is not only changing, it's not reimagining the person, but it's reimagining the skill set and the approach and the attitudes towards the work and the requirements for their own fulfillment and happiness, because a lot has changed. I mean, I think the model of the career counselor in a private office waiting for people to schedule appointments, and then you go out and get them from a waiting room, is gone. You know, that's way behind us. And if that's what you're still doing, I think you're not reinventing fast enough, and you might find yourself being reinvented out of a job in the future. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And there's a good question in the chat too, is who's going to take responsibility for that rethinking? Can the National Association of Colleges and Employers really reimagine the training and the new models for what is offered there? Branden, I know you're heading this effort right now for NACE, trying to rethink all of this. Are there nuggets for us to try to hear or to know about at this point?
Absolutely. You know, I think that part of it has been, and just to name the body that you're referring to, there's a strategic positioning of career services, which is a task force within NACE currently, and Lindsay Pollock, who's on the webinar, is a part of that, as well as Susan Helbig and Kelly Smith. But I think part of it is we could be a lot more concrete about what the benefits to working on our profession are. You know, we have a hard time naming that and defining it. And similarly to what I've been talking about all day today, what are the barriers that exist for the pipeline we're trying to create to join career services? I mentioned in the chat that we tend to hire from outside of higher education to gain a little bit more street credibility with our students, so that if they're speaking to one of our staff members, they know that that person's had experience outside of an educational institution. But that's tough to do because it takes resources to attract someone from an industry that usually pays more. So I think resources have to be on the table at some point. But I would say, generally speaking, you know, if the model that you referred to, Farouk, is based upon a doctor's office model where people come into a lobby and wait to be seen by a doctor, and during the pandemic, telehealth took off, and most doctors' offices now have a really seamless way to meet their patients. Surely career services can do the same. So, you know, most things we need to diagnose do not need to be seen physically, and I'm not sure diagnosis is even a thing we do anymore.
Indeed. Katharine, any last words before we wrap it up?
Fantastic conversation. And I just wanted to put one more add in. As we reimagine and we get rid of the career office, it's not just careers that needs to be reimagined. We have to bring our academic partners into the conversation. And why can't they talk about careers too? because they're practitioners. They know all about what they're teaching. So I imagine a big tent in this new imagined space, a big tent. There's enough room for everybody. And with still having excellent careers experts.
Very good. Well, this was an awesome conversations, and I couldn't have imagined, no pun intended, a better group to have it with than with the three of you, Katharine, Branden, and Joe. You were just all inspiring, and you're doing great work. I also want to give a quick shout out to all of the people who joined us today, and a quick also shout out to Southern New Hampshire University. Somebody said in the chat that they are ahead of the game and doing a lot of the things that we are doing today. So take a look at their models as well. There's a lot of great work that's being done in a lot of good universities. Plenty of imagining and reimagining to do for all of you. Thank you so much for joining us today. Remember what I always say, the only vision that matters is the one that you create. Thank you all so much, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Take care.